Okay, so we hear about the AI revolution constantly, right? It's everywhere. But what if the most important part of that whole story isn't the software at all? What if it's something way more physical, something you can actually, touch? Let's get into it. So, what is AI really made of? I mean, if your first thought is just clever code or data or some algorithm floating around in the cloud, well, the sources we're digging into today have a pretty serious wake up call. The real story isn't digital, it's physical. And this quote right here really gets to the absolute heart of it. There's this new phrase people are using to describe the fundamental resource of our time. Compute is the new oil. And listen, it's not because it's running out. It's because, just like oil was in the last century, it's the one thing that everything else is starting to depend on. So what even is compute? The most important thing to get is that it's not software. It's the hard, physical reality underneath it all. We're talking silicon wafers, tons of copper wiring, massive power plants, and these enormous cooling systems. So what we're watching unfold isn't just another tech boom. It's a global industrial mobilization, really on a scale we haven't seen for decades. Because when you get right down to it, AI doesn't run on pure logic. It runs on electrons, just massive, massive amounts of them. The biggest bottleneck for building AI is no longer finding brilliant programmers. It's the humble electron. And the hunger for that power is just staggering. These new data refineries, as some are calling them, can need their own dedicated power plants and heavy-duty transmission grids. You can't just plug these things into a wall socket. And here's the reality check. You can train a new AI model in just a few weeks, but it takes years, literally years, to build a power plant. You just can't improvise that in a crisis. All that energy creates another brutal physical problem: heat. Compute generates this constant fever that has to be cooled all the time, and that often requires just enormous amounts of water. So what's really wild is that a model's ability to think is ultimately limited by how fast we can get the heat out of the hardware. And the heart of the machine itself? Well, it's literally made from the Earth's crust. We love to think of AI as this virtual, weightless thing, but it's built from vast quantities of silicon, copper, and other rare minerals that have to be dug out of the ground and processed. And this brings us to a super important point. Unlike software, right, which you can just copy and scale for almost no cost, compute is incredibly expensive and capital intensive. And once you build it, it's immovable. You're talking billions of dollars before the very first prediction is ever generated. And just like an old oil refinery, once it's built, it locks in a strategic advantage for decades to come. So if compute really is the new oil, that brings up a very, very old question. Who controls the supply chain? Who owns the refineries? And this is exactly where the whole conversation shifts from engineering to geopolitics. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. It shows the new landscape of power, where once all the leverage came from controlling oil tankers and pipelines, now it comes from controlling chip fabs and energy grids. The physical refineries of the 20th century have become the hyperscale data centers of the 21st. The logic of how you control things, it's eerily similar. And this new reality, it creates entirely new vulnerabilities. I mean, we're already seeing how export controls on the most advanced chips can be straight up weaponized. A political decision made in one country's capital can effectively slam the brakes on the technological progress of another. And the reason that's even possible is because the entire global supply chain is incredibly fragile. It's concentrated in just a few key locations, in the hands of a few key players. So a single disruption, a factory shutdown, a blocked shipping lane, it can paralyze the entire digital world. So the crucial point here is that this gives the owners of the infrastructure immense leverage. They have the power to effectively throttle the digital economies of entire nations by controlling access to these physical choke points. So you can almost visualize this new world order as a kind of pyramid. At the very, very bottom, the foundation of everything is the physical layer. This is the silicon, the copper, the energy. It's the silent, heavy infrastructure that nobody sees. Now, sitting directly on top of that physical base is the compute layer. These are those data center refineries we've been talking about, the crucial infrastructure that transforms all that raw material and energy into actual processing power. And then finally, way up at the very top of the pyramid, you've got the layer we all see and interact with every day, the application layer. The AI models, the apps, services like ChatGPT. This is the thin, visible surface of a massive, massive physical pyramid. And here is a core power dynamic of the 21st century. Controlling that top layer without owning the bottom ones is a complete illusion of control. You might be able to write all the regulations you want for AI apps, but if you don't own the refineries, you don't actually control the technology. There's this quote from the source material that just says it all perfectly. Cheap inference doesn't make you a compute power, just as cheap gasoline doesn't make you an oil magnet. In other words, having access to AI models, it doesn't make you powerful. Being a user is fundamentally different from being an owner. So the conclusion for nations and companies that depend on others for their compute infrastructure is, well, it's pretty stark. If you don't own the refinery, you aren't a sovereign player. You're effectively just a tenant, renting your capacity to think from a new class of digital feudal lords. Or, to put it another way, you either own the infrastructure or you are just a line item in someone else's accounting. And that really is the new reality of digital sovereignty in the age of compute. Which leaves us all with a final, pretty provocative question to think about. In this new age, where power isn't flowing from oil fields but from data centers, do you own the refinery, or are you just the customer at the pump?